I thought I'd tell you something that happened to us. As Laura Jones told you a while ago, a great honor was bestowed on the Coon Creek girls in 1939. We'd been together 2 years almost. And it all stemmed from that festival we did in Washington where we thought nobody liked us. But there was somebody there that did. And one day Mr. Lair called us over to his office. Girls, come over here right quick. He said, I've got some good news for you. And we thought, oh, goody, we're going to get a raise, Well, we went over there just flying, but that wasn't what it was, but it was something we had never dared dream possible. Mrs. Roosevelt was planning an after-dinner concert in honor of the King and Queen of England. That was King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, parents of the present reigning queen. They were to pay their first visit to this country and to the White House. And she wanted to give them an all-American concert after dinner. And she was to have Lawrence Tippett for the opera tenor, and Marian Anderson was to do the classical, and Kate Smith was to do the popular songs. Alan Lomax was to do the Western folk songs. And the Coon Creek girls she had chosen from the festival as she was attending, and we didn't know it, of course, to do Appalachian music. And then there was 100 black people from there in Washington. And I think they were from various churches there in Washington. They were to sing the Southern Spirituals. And there was 16 square dancers, I believe, from Asheville, North Carolina, there with Bascom, Lamar, Lunsford. And the Coon Creek girls were to play the music for them. And that was to wind up the concert. We got there 2 days early so we could go out and rehearse. And one day out at the White House, at different places, and then finally to the East Ballroom. And there was a committee in charge of us, a man, 2 men and a woman. And they were very nervous for fear the Coon Creek girls, being little country girls, would do something to embarrass their majesties and the Roosevelts. Well, they followed us around all day, rehearsing us, and just on every step or every move that we made, we wasn't a bit nervous. We were highly confident of ourselves. But we were getting to get that way a little bit and wondered what's so almighty about it all, you know. We hadn't been interested in the presidents and the king and queen much before, but we began to realize we were getting into something there. But that night, they sent a limousine for us. And by the time we got there, the gate swung wide and let the limousine in, had the organizing committee and the Coon Creek girls and all their instruments in there. And we had dressed and primped ourselves in our street dresses we wore. And we wore them, we had some of them made and some of them we bought, matched our names. I wore a white one, Rose wore a pink one, Rosie wore a pink one, Daisy wore one, a green one with daisies printed all over it, and Violet wore a purple and lavender one that she had made. And we trimmed them up with a bit of lace, you know, and we wore low-heel shoes. And Mr. Lair asked us not to wear white shoes. And we also told us not to wear the long calico dresses we wore on the stage that he had us wear, nor the high-top shoes, nor the ribbon bows in our hair to go with our old-time music. We wore old-timey dresses. And he said the organizing committee thought it could be shocking to the Queen, and she should not be subjected to calico. So, well, the show was underway when we got there, but first I'll tell you what a hassle we had at the gates when they wouldn't let Mr. Laird in. The committee had told him you might get in by putting the bass fiddle in your car, and you and Mrs. Laird follow our car. And said when we get to the gates, it'll be heavily guarded. And said you'll have to explain, and they may have to make a call or something to get you in. So sure enough, they swung wide for us, and we drove on in. And Mr. Laird, they stopped his car at once, and they hauled the bass fiddle out of there, and they took the case off of it. They looked in all the pockets of it. You know, the cases have pockets. They're made out of canvas. And looked in all the pockets, and they shook the bass fiddle, shone a flashlight down in it. We stopped and waited and watched to see if he's going to make it through. And we finally saw him come on with his bass fiddle, walking, and they turned Mrs. Lair back. And she cried, and she went back to the hotel to wait for us. And Mr. Lair come along behind us, toting bass fiddle. Well, that was kind of funny to us because we thought, well, back home he's king, and we were the subjects, the little kids, you know. It'd have been him in the limousine and us toting bass fiddle. Now, well, we had a lot of laughs about that, and there were some other guards planted along the driveway, and he'd have another hassle, and we'd have to stop and wait on him till he got through that one. But he finally got in there with it, and we all got in. By that time, Kate Smith was finishing her song, and then next was to be out on Lomax, and each was to have 3 numbers. So we were ushered up there in the middle of out on Lomax's Western song, Old Chisholm Trail, his last one. Then they announced us formally. I believe all they said was, Coon Creek Girls, somebody in uniform and monkey suit. Well, anyway, we ran out there and lit right in. How many biscuits can you eat? That's what they told us that Ms. Roosevelt wanted. She'd heard us do that at the festival, and we started picking and singing, and we'd been told, now, you won't get to see the king and queen. Now, the other performers were talking. There was some envy, you know, which is natural. You won't get to see the king and queen. No, they and the Roosevelts, they'll be behind the veiled place, and they can see you, but you can't see them. And so we didn't look for them, but we were looking at the splendor in this great, beautiful East Ballroom, and all those lovely gowns and jewels and fancy hairdos, and the men in their white ties and tails, and everybody sitting up straight and looking their best. And I'm sure that we were pretty awed by what we were seeing, and it wasn't exactly like playing schoolhouse where everybody stomped and hollered and whistled and patted their hands and grinned and laughed, you know, and we all had a big time. We saw it wasn't to be that way. But we played How Many Biscuits. We'd sing a verse, and then we'd sing the chorus, and then we'd fiddle one, and then somebody else would sing a verse, and we'd sing the chorus, and then I'd pick one on the banjo. We'd done that so many times on the stage, we could do it automatically at the same time, look around a little bit, you know. And we'd been told not to stare. We were getting pretty professional. We knew not to do that anyhow. But you can't help but size things up if you know your song well and know you're not going to miss any of it. So we kept glancing out the corner there, and right down there they were, the king and queen and Rose in the front row, almost right in our face. Well, you could have spit on them. They were sitting there. Well, there was Mrs. Roosevelt, whom we noticed first and recognized at once by seeing her pictures in the paper, and she'd been called a plain woman or a homely woman by many, and we kind of thought so too, you know, but we'd always been, liked her. She was always smiling in her pictures and was always busy attending things, and seemed to be working for the mountain people and for the poor people and minority groups. And so we already liked her, and she was smiling, and she had on a nice fitted chiffon gown. It was no fluff for her. She was not that kind of dresser. And just a single string of pearls. And her hair was nicely done. And I thought she had a nice white and pink complexion that went with her dress. And I thought, well, she's an attractive woman. Now, she's not ugly like they've been saying. Of course, they had that beautiful chandelier with soft lights glowing on all that. And that made everybody, I guess, look prettier. But she'd look down at the little program in her lap, and look at her, and then she'd glance up at each one, and I thought, oh, she's noticing our dresses. She's noticed that our colors, we're wearing our colors, and she's noticing which one is who. I noticed the little queen and thought she was just as pretty as a little doll. Now, not that she was little. She was a little bit on the plump side, but not enough to hurt her. But she had on such a lovely gown, tight bodice and a great bouffant skirt, and it sparkled, but it was very muted, with the layers of dark chiffon. And she had on the diamond tiara. Is that what you call it? Well, anyway, she had it on. Her pretty hair. And she was smiling and showing her pretty teeth. Mrs. Roosevelt was. And President Roosevelt was. He seemed to be enjoying himself immensely. And he had a very deep tan and pretty sparkling, gleaming white teeth. And we thought him a very handsome man. And then my eyes swung over to the king, and that just ruined the whole thing. And he was sitting there just like this, just like a ramrod, straight as he could be. Not a muscle moving, didn't bat an eye, looking straight ahead. And I thought, well, You old sourpuss, you. I thought that to myself, you know. And I thought, if you don't like the show, he ought to get on up and go on to his room or wherever. I thought, maybe he'll like the next one. Maybe he don't like biscuits. We were singing How Many Biscuits. Maybe he's a cornbread man, you know. Well, I thought, well, I'm not going to look at him more. That'll ruin the whole thing. And I like to drop a couple stitches on my banjo looking at him that time. So we went on and sung our Soldier and the Lady. That had been chosen as an English ballad for the King and Queen. And then our third number was Get Along Home Cindy. And we were told that that was President Roosevelt's favorite folk song, and I believe that it was. I remember that he recrossed his legs and got himself all set to enjoy himself, and he did smile broadly all the way through that. We felt encouraged, and I thought, well, I'll not look at the king no more, but it seemed like I just had to check on him one more time. Well, I swung my eye back, you know, to the right where he was sitting, and he's looking exactly the same way, not a bit happier than he was a while ago, you know. But I glanced down and caught him patting his foot. I thought, uh-oh, we got him. So then the 100 black folks were doing the spirituals, and they sung Wade in the Water, a sound I'll never forget. I remember that steady pound, that rhythm they were doing with their voices. That was a great sound to me. Then they put on the square dancers, and boy, they just tore up that stage, and it was a large one to hold 16 dancers. And us girls got off to the side and played for them. They wanted it fast, and we give it to them. And so that was the end of our concert, except the orchestra played God Save the King, and everybody stood. And I was liking him a little better, you know, than I did before, because if I hadn't been, I'd have thought I'd just soon they'd save somebody else, you know. But anyway, we went on back downstairs. We circled the big stage, went on around behind it, and back down to the dressing room, where we were served caviar sandwiches and raspberry punch. That was our first caviar ever. Well, I believe it was the last, come to think of it. And it's not getting any cheaper, and I guess never will get any more of it. But I happened to look down and noticed Sis we had to wear silk hose that night. We were used to wearing cotton hose under those high-top shoes, and we had to take our money on stage with us. We didn't want to take pocketbooks on the stage. So we would stick money somewhere in our clothing, usually our shoe, and under our garter. You wore garters in those days and rolled the stocking around them. Well, those old cotton stockings would hold money if you tuck it under them. But the silk hose, it had worked loose, and I looked down and Sis had a $20 bill on the front of her leg. Well, I said, Sis, Lord have mercy. What in this world did you put that in your stocking for? She said, why, I didn't. She said, I'll swear that I stuck it under my garter, and she said, it's worked loose and slipped down there. I said, well, no wonder the king was sitting there in shock. And Roosevelt was having such a good time, too.